taking your microphone and putting it on, then taking your Bibles to Exodus 19. Have a little bit to finish up from 19 and then hopefully through 20 and 21 fairly efficiently. Exodus 19:14. So Moses went down from the mountain to the people and sanctified the people and washed their clothes. And he said to them, be ready for the third day. Do not come near your wives. And it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunder. I'm sorry, I'm reading. That's the wrong one. It's in the right spot, but it's on the wrong chapter. I go by page, the spot on the page. Y'all do that? It's like, it's in that Bible in James on the right-hand side in the top right-hand corner. It's Exodus 20, verse 18. Now all the people witnessed the thunderings, the lightnings, the flashes, the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood afar off. Then they said to Moses, you speak with us, and we will hear. But let not God speak with us, lest we die. And Moses said to the people, do not fear, for God has come to test you, and that his fear may be before you, so that you may not sin. So the people stood afar off, but Moses drew near the thick darkness where God was. And let's pray. Father, God bless us with the sense of your word. I pray that it might be profitable unto us today, that it might be meaningful, that it might be applicable, God, that it might be convicting and directing. Lord, something in some communication, God, and something from you, whether it's for our rebuke or our encouragement, God. We do not want to live in complacency, and we do not want to goof off the days and be spiritually lazy, or be consumed with the pleasures and the things of this world. But God, like you said, while it is day, Lord, let us work. And let us be mindful, because the night comes. And God, make us to be wise in your grace, Lord, to number our days and to do well with them. God, and to reach for that potential, Lord, that you see in all of us, God. May you have your way, and may you be pleased, and may we receive something today from your word, Lord, to take with us, God, and to live out our relationship with you by your word. In Christ's name, amen. You recall last time we went over the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, which are here, and they're also repeated again, and all of this is repeated again. And Deuteronomy, we go through Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, that was 40 years. Deuteronomy is one day. If you think about it chronologically, time-wise, they got to a day, and Moses stood up in Deuteronomy, and that's what Deuteronomy is, and in one big, y'all thought I went long, in one big, gigantic sermon was Deuteronomy, and he recapped everything for them. But here, going through this for the first time, we begin to see some of God's law for his people, and we just went over what we call the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments. Now we're going to look into the Book of the Covenant, and they get this term, it's just like a term like the Old Testament or the Pentateuch or the pastoral epistles. And, it doesn't make you any more spiritual, but at least when somebody says the Book of the Covenant, you know what they're talking about. They're talking about this few chapters. I think it goes to like chapter 24 or something. I don't know, but you know what he's talking about. He's talking about the civil law, and the ritual law that he goes through. And it's called the Book of the Covenant. They get that from chapter 24. The Book of the Covenant. But these are the laws that God made for his people, for his nation. But before we get there, I want to go back and finish up in chapter 20. He said that the response of the people, when God came near, said, "You speak with us, and we will hear, but let not God speak with us, lest we die." There is a scary element to really coming into an intimate relationship with God. And if you're really faithful with it, and you're honest with it, and you're really giving yourself unto him, that God's going to do things in your life that are going to terrify you. And that's just a fact. That's just plain. You can go anywhere in Scripture and you look all over, and you look very, very early on when at the fall of Adam and Eve, I'm sure they were terrified. You look at his response to Cain. Cain was terrified. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And, the things that he brought people to when he told Moses, "Moses, you're going to go back to Egypt," he was terrified. He was afraid. Jeremiah, and God had to tell Jeremiah, and Jeremiah, you better not be terrified of what I'm telling you, otherwise I'll let them terrify you. That's tough, isn't it? And over, he sent these spies over into the land of Canaan. They were supposed to go in, and they saw the big bad dudes over there, and they were terrified. The disciples in Matthew chapter 6, I don't know if at that point you could count them terrified, but they were very worried. What are we going to eat? What are we going to wear? How's this going to work, God? Where's our living going to come from? What are we going to do? They were definitely terrified when he was taken into custody. Although they all boasted that they would never depart and they would never leave him. They had that big church talk, right? Then the time came along. And my question to you, we could go on to talk about Peter and Paul and how, taken into custody, held in prison. Paul floated in the dark for 3 nights, in the Mediterranean or one of the seas, the Aegean or the Mediterranean. I don't know about y'all, but you drop me in the ocean in the middle of the night, I'm fine in a lake. I know zoology. Nothing's going to eat you in a lake. Stuff will eat you in the ocean. Like you're on the menu out there. And I don't like bobbing like a cork all night. In a deep ocean. And your little feet dangling down there. Terrifying things. What makes you think that it's going to be different in your life? And God's not going to, because, when fear comes in, the only thing you can answer fear with in life is faith. I think it was Adrian Rogers had that little, saying that he had, they're called Adrianisms. He said, fear knocked at the door, faith answered, and nobody was there. And that's God's objective in us, is so that we would increase in faith. And the only way to deal with things that terrify us in life is by faith. And it may not be like you're thinking, it may be that God asks you to take a direction in life that makes you financially afraid. It might be that God asks you to take a relationship direction in your life that makes you emotionally afraid. That's a huge one for us. And between spouses, and between siblings, and between parents and sons and daughters. To be vulnerable again, right? And you have to learn how to make yourself vulnerable again, because if you're not vulnerable, you can't love. Can't give anybody a hug with the, plate armor suit on, right? It doesn't work. It feels rather cold and hard and tough, But God will take us through things in life that cause us to be terrified. And God is taking them through things that are causing them to be terrified. And they didn't know how they were going to make it, where they were going to get water, where they were going to get food, how they were going to overcome these people. And so even God himself comes down to them, and he himself is terrifying to them. The scripture talks about the fear of the Lord, Yareh. And it's the same word like we have. It's two-sided coin, isn't it? That you have a fear. I have a fear of rattlesnakes, but that doesn't mean I won't certainly handle one, and I have this reverence for them, a respect for them. Why? Because they lead the United States in death, right? It's the nastiest snake we have, Western diamond rattlesnake. I'm not afraid of them in the sense of I'm going to scream and run away, but I'm sure I'm reverential of them. I respect them. I know that they have a capacity to inflict harm. There's things that we're afraid of, and if you could take the ambiguity of fear and divide it into two things, and that's being afraid and being reverential. And there's, two ways that we can look at God. And God intends for us to be perhaps a little bit of both of those. I like to tell God, tell men that, your children literally need to be a little bit afraid of you. Like it's really a healthy thing if they know, what, my dad can, he can take care of business if he needs to, and they literally, that's the only thing at one point in their life that they'll respect. They don't care about your diplomatic words. They don't care that they're hurting your feelings, but they do care if their backside stings, or if they don't get to play with their electronics or something like that. But there needs to be something there, and I think that there's there's two people that are really afraid of God. Like is God going to, hurt me? And there's a couple kind of people that are not afraid of God. The kind of people that are not afraid of God are the naive and the obedient. There's a person that, whatever I spoke with a lady this week that was just spouting off her opinions and ideas and certainties about God, and I said something about Timothy, and she said, "Is that in the Old Testament?" I thought, from where are you fixing all of your ideas and beliefs? If you're not even sure where the book of Timothy is, it's not because of a saturation in Scripture, but you came up with these ideas in your head. That's naivety. That's not really understanding who God is, the person of God, how God interacts with people, the history of his interaction with people. That's just going about assuming the way it is. That's a person not knowing what the rattlesnake is and just, oh, look at this garter snake, the naive. They're not afraid of God. The other person that's not afraid of God is the mature person who knows who God is, yet they're obedient. And they know they don't have any need to be afraid of God because they're in obedience to him, and they understand that God's not a prankster and God's not, cruel, and, and whatever bad thing comes along, well, they know very well, Romans 8:28, that he uses all things for good to those who, you see the condition, that love him. Well, what is love according to God? Well, in John, I think it says it 3 or 4 times, if you love me, keep my commandments. Who is he that loveth me? But he that has my commandments and keepeth them. And then so there's those people. There's another kind of people that are afraid of God, and that's be somebody who doesn't know him to be benevolent, doesn't know him to be good and righteous and just in everything that he does. And the other person that is afraid of him is the person that knows him and knows that they're living in rebellion. That's a person without peace. You're a Christian. You're a Christian. You know that you've been purchased and redeemed by Christ. Yet you can think in your mind and in your heart that God is not well pleased with what you're doing or how you're doing it. And it can cause people to be afraid. What's God going to do to me now? And I'll say this, anybody who has experienced the chastisement of God and knows what it is to go into rebellion and to live in rebellion and to be redirected and corrected by God, well, you can become afraid. And then when you have a habit of sin, you become really afraid. And you live in turmoil and you live with this spiritual anxiety because you know that there's things in your life that are not right. You don't know that you have his blessing, and you don't know that everything is going to be okay. You don't know that he's directing your paths. You don't know that he's using everything for the good in your life because you're not loving him. And you're not, you know when you're going to receive your parents' blessing, that's when you're pleasing to your parents. Boy, that child, right, that wants to do well and to please you, it's like, boy, let me bend over backward to do what I can for you, and then the rascal child, is like, well, I'm not going to break my leg trying to go too far for you. And so you understand that, but they came to the point, and I think that whatever the cause, whatever the means, it was rather sad. And it's rather sad when people would rather have some intermediate between them and God. People love that idea. People love that idea, to have somebody to go to, and I know that there's a good way and a reason for people to come to their pastor and say, would you pray for me? Would you pray with me? But I can tell you this, there's tons of people that go to pastors that are wanting this pastor to be this intermediate guy that does the hard work, or that has some kind of special, lamp or something, and mekalekahai mekahini ho, and that I have some kind of power or something like that, and they want a person to go through, or they like the idea of there being a priest, but the thing is that there's only one mediator between God and man, and that's, well, God the Son, the Lord Jesus Christ. And the ideal thing, and of course God uses people as mentors and teachers, and absolutely that is like written into the way God works, absolutely. But do you know, eventually, and as soon as possible, God wants his direct interaction with you. But when you get there, and the farther you get into it, the more terrifying it can become. And that he's going to ask you to do things that you never, dreamed of, and he's going to take you through things that you never wanted to go through. But it's his will and it's his plan for your life. You look how he interacted with them. They were terrified, but look at God's objective in it all. Why did he do this, and why did he terrify them? And what is the purpose of this all? We learn this in writing. When you write papers, and you're like, well, you need to state your objective in the first, paragraph. Right there in the introduction. And then in your conclusion, you need to go back and you need to, touch on that again and answer questions and make conclusions and do all that. So you're like, oh, okay, what was the point of it? Y'all ever sit through a meeting, like one of those business meetings or those conference calls, and you get done with that and you're like, what? So why do we do this? Like, what was the purpose of this? I always have homeowners, and they work from home, and they're like, I'm on a conference call, and they've got that thing muted, and they're walking around the yard with me, and blah, blah. Well, I think, and these people going off, and they know that there's, there's really nothing pertinent there for them, and I hope that's the case, but they go through it very well, and you're like, well, what's the purpose? But God specifies his purpose, and he makes it known. Like, why would God do that? Why would God do that? Why would God let you go through terrifying things in your life? Why would God let you be overwhelmed with these things in life? Because you have to remember that his agenda is to conform you into the likeness of his Son. We had little kids that, pooped in their diapers. And it was none of our desires for them to continue pooping in their diapers. We wanted them to grow up. And we started using these phrases like the big boy potty and the big girl potty. And this is what big boys and girls do, and you need to grow up and to be, this child that we can be proud of and that is doing well, that you can go use a toilet and wipe your own backside, and then from there it just goes on that you want them to eventually be able to make their own good decisions and make their own money and support themselves and go beyond that to do better. And we want them to grow up. And don't you know that God wants us to grow up? And he wants us to, eventually use the big boy and the big girl prayers and decisions and to do all these things. And he takes us through these things and through these experiences, because you know what? When you're terrified, what do? God. I need you, God. The thing is he'll get you into things like Jacob, when Jacob was counting on his abilities to connive and to flee and to dodge and weave and zip and zap, and he wrestled with Jacob, and he reached down while he was wrestling with him, and he shriveled up, he atrophied his, hip muscle or whatever he did, shriveled the whole of his thigh, and that whatever it did, it caused Jacob to walk with a limp and a staff for the rest of his life. And then Jacob was really terrified. And what did Jacob need? Well, I really need you now, God. Well, what did he do? He turned around from fighting with the Lord and he latched on to the Lord. And the Lord said, well, hey, why don't you let me go? And he said, no, not until you bless me. I need you now. I need you now. And so you see there's so many reasons why God brings you through these things and he puts you in these situations and so often so that you absolutely know that you need him. And we all know, I bet you've been there before when something was really serious in your life. I bet you didn't go out on a sin rant. Right? I mean, when the red phone was going off and there were big issues and big problems and it was hitting you in the heart, I bet you didn't go on some kind of crazy sin binge, did you? No. I need you, God, and I need to be pleasing unto you, and I need to do well. And that's what he wrote there. He said, Moses told me, he said that he did all this, and he said that his fear may be before you so that you may not sin. And that is definitely not like an Old Testament principle, It was John 5:14 when he healed the paralytic man on the Sabbath. He told that man, go and sin no more. In John chapter 8, when they brought the adulterous woman to him, and they were trying to get him to stone her, and they all left, starting from the oldest to the youngest. And you know what he told that adulterous woman? Go and sin no more. Romans chapter 6, verse 12, he says, therefore do not let sin reign in your mortal body so that you may obey its lusts. Ephesians chapter 4:26 quotes Ecclesiastes, be angry and sin not. 1 John chapter 2, verse 1, John wrote unto them, my little children, I write unto you that you may not sin. And if anybody sins, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous. But you see there the purpose. And my question to you is, how many of you have a deliberate, conscious war on sin in your life? Like you're engaged. Because I know the cycles we go through. Yeah, that's there and it's not supposed to be, and I'm kind of just bumping along, and, God hasn't killed me yet, and I know I really shouldn't be there, but it is there, and I'm trying, and this and that, but how, do we have a war on sin? That's God's intention. He doesn't want us to sin. He doesn't want us to live in sin. He doesn't want us to continue in sin because he wants us to be more like him, and he doesn't sin. And it's a very slow process. And you're like, I don't know. Do you have a war on sin? I can ask you a couple questions that might help you know. Do you know very distinctively how it is that you have sinned in the last couple days? Did you take note of it? Did it bother you enough that you remembered it? Or maybe you're a really good person and you go a couple days without committing sin, but I can't. Yeah, at least something I know that's displeasing to God. Maybe I can't find it in the Bible verbatim that says it's a sin, but I know it's displeasing to God. Do you know, just from the last few days, do you know what have been or what is the besetting sins of your life? What are, I should say. Those besetting sins, those ones that stick with you for years. And, like Paul said, to the pulling down of strongholds. What does he mean? He means like those kind of things. Habits, addictions, dependencies, those things that we can't break. Do you know what they are? Do you have any kind of testimony of a besetting sin that God has brought you through and given you victory over? It might have taken 5, 7, 10, 15 years. Y'all know people go through that long of a period of time battling against something and finally overcoming it. I mean, that's what it is. Some people say, well, that's miserable. That's a miserable way to live. I think it's more miserable to ignore it and to not have the peace that you know that you should have with God. Not have to worry about the future, not have to worry about your finances, and just to say, you know what, I'm in God's hands. I'm not in rebellion against him. I got nothing up my sleeve. There's no shenanigans. I am very clearly in his hands, and he's going to do with me what he would like to do. He's going to permit what he would like to permit, and you have that peace. That was a big issue for him. It's always through the whole Scripture. That was the thing. Even if you go all the way to the revelation given unto John and you read the letters to the churches, what was it that God pointed out? Yet I have something against you. Yet there's this problem here. And I know it can be overwhelming and frustrating. You feel like you never get it right. But listen, God's not asking you for this perfection. In fact, He brings us along so slowly, doesn't He? You didn't ask your 2-year-old to pay their bills. You just asked them to use the big boy potty. Just use the big boy potty. And that's each one of us are like living in a certain increment or time in our lives where God knows what we know, and He knows what we're capable of, and He's constantly asking us for the next step. Okay, that's good. Let's go a little farther. Do not grow weary of doing well, is what the Scripture says. And the Bible says that to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, it is sin. And you can't give up, and you can't throw your hands up, and you can't be fatigued, and if you are fatigued and you're weary, it's because you're not being renewed and you're not being strengthened, and there might be something to repent of and to renew yourself in Him and to go and to spend time with Him. But that was His agenda, that He wanted them to get to the point to where they would not sin, or stop sinning so much and start growing in Him and start changing and being changed by Him. So the people stood afar off, but Moses drew near the thick darkness where God was. And it says, Then the Lord said to Moses, Thus you shall say to the children of Israel, You have seen that I have talked with you from heaven. You shall not make anything to be with me, gods of silver or gods of gold, and you shall not make for yourselves an altar of the earth. You shall make for me. You shall sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I record my name, I will welcome you. I will bless you. And if you make me an altar of stone, you shall not build it of hewn stone. For if you use your tool on it, you have profaned it, nor shall you go up by steps to my altar, that your nakedness may not be exposed on it. He wanted to be very simple. He wanted to make sure that it was Him. I think as much as we can stay away from relics and emblems and things, it's crazy the things that people get themselves fixed on in religion. That they have to sing their songs out of a hymn book, or they have to sing their songs off of a screen. It doesn't matter. I think I've told y'all before, but one time in my life, I found myself simultaneously dealing with two opposite things. I was on a board for the Baptist Student Ministry at Tarleton State University, and I was also, in a church at the time, and we were contemplating getting TVs. To put lyrics on. Oh, and some people in the church, did not, no offense, but it was the older generation. You know how we are. We get stuck where we are, and I'm already getting stuck where I am. I know, I see it coming on. And, the older generation just thought that was, some of them just thought that was wrong. You can't sing your worship music off a TV, it's not possible. Well, simultaneously, since I'm in building construction, it was Clayton Bullion, the director of the BSM, that asked me to come up there since I knew all this stuff, and we stayed there for 2 or 3 hours trying to figure out, because they had this exposed trussing in their auditorium, and the trusses were in the way, and we sat there. Well, we could put one here and there, and we could put them over here, and and after a while I said, or Clayton, y'all could just read it out of a book. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, and I thought, this is so ridiculous. I'm working with two different groups of Christians, one that thinks that they can't worship out of a book, and one that thinks they can't worship off a TV. I mean, absurd things that we get in our heads and ideas, and God kept, and you'll find, you look in the New Testament, there is very, very, very little rules around liturgy. You have to do it this way, and you have to go through these steps this way. I remember one time, administering the Lord's Supper in a church, and they had a cloth, a table with a cloth draped over the cup and the bread, and we got close, and I picked that cloth up and I draped it over the pulpit. And afterwards, a few men came to me, and they were very serious, and they're like, well, we didn't like the way you just picked that cloth up and laid it over the pulpit. And I was like, oh, I didn't know. Was that the shout at your end or something? What really? What was the deal? I wasn't tacky with them. They were older men in the church, but it was silly. It was silly. And God tried to prevent that even in their worship back then. Of course, the temple was very elaborate and it was very purposeful the way he designed it and where he made it. But when it came to making an offering, it was very simple. And let's not cloud this up with a bunch of religion and a bunch of stuff. And I don't want your design to go into any of it, is what he told them. That's probably why he gave such elaborate directions for the tent and the temple, both the tabernacle and the temple. But he said you can't touch it, because if you touch it, you're going to mess it up. You're going to make it put little points on it here this year, and next year you're going to put little designs on it down there. In 3 or 4 years, you'll have some frog god coming out of it or something like that. So he wouldn't let them touch it with any kind of a hammer or to shape it, or to do anything like that. And now we read some of the judgments that he gave. And if you look, there's statutes, there's judgments, there's precepts. There are different words in Scripture, and they have different meanings. You remember that he appointed these overseers, these judges, right? Judges over thousands, over hundreds, over tens, and all these. And these were things that he taught them that they were supposed to be. It's a set of standards. It's a set of judgments. It's very much like the way we do our law now. In the courts we do, we have our laws, which set forth, because you cannot. I think we have something like 10,000 laws now in the United States. And we still run across things that we can't, what speaks to that? You have to find generalities and principles, rights, and judgments and standards. And even in courts of law, they go back and they reference previous judgments. Whatever, Smith versus, Bailey, and the outcome of that, the determination of that. Okay, but these were judgments that he gave. And it's very interesting. Some of these things are very challenging to our ideas. And very challenging, I think, to what we think of God. And it sets our culture against God in a sense and in a way. But the thing that you have to reconcile in your theology, and you have theology whether you believe it or not, you have formed in your mind your belief and your thoughts about God, whether you want to or not. If I asked you, how do you like the color of this carpet in this room? As much as you'd like to stay neutral, that you have a thought and a belief about it. And whatever it may be, you have a thought and a belief about God. And reading through the Old Testament, you're like, well, what good is it? And what does it do? So many of these things teach us about the person and the personality, the character of God, and the things that he commanded, I'd say the ideas that he had, but I don't like, that's an anthropomorphism, if you ask me. God doesn't have ideas, he has truth. He doesn't have opinions, he has truth. God, nothing's ever occurred to God, right? Nothing ever occurred to him. Nothing ever formed. I used to think this way, but now I think this way. God's not trying to collect observations and form an idea. He has truth from the beginning, and he knows already. But you read the truth of God and the things that he prescribed, and it's rather shocking and rather amazing, I think. So now these are the judgments. These are the judgments which you shall set before them, before the judges, right? And here's another interesting thing about these couple chapters as we get into this. There were these judges appointed, right? And these judges were supposed to use these judgments to judge among the people. And do you know the word that is used for judges there is Elohim? Like we would, the same word in the beginning, Elohim, created the heavens and the earth. And these judges are then the word Elohim. And you're like, well, that's messed up, right? Well, automatically, this is what especially anybody who speaks one language thinks, is that superiority is in your language. Right? We read that and we're like, why would he use the same word? But don't you know that we say that Jesus is the Lord, yet just maybe 100 years ago, that was a common use in the English language for your own boss, right? If you were a servant on an estate 250, 200 years ago, well, you would have been the Lord of the state, right? And, so we use that. What about creator? Well, Van Gogh was the creator of all kinds of paintings, but when we say God the creator, we know because of the context that it takes on an authoritative sense, nuance, that, there's ambiguity in the words they use. Here they use the word Elohim for these judges. And he said, now these are the judgments which you shall set before them. He says, if you buy a Hebrew servant, automatically it sounds bad, doesn't it? You're like, oh man, yep, I knew it. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he shall serve 6 years. And in the 7th he shall go out free and pay nothing. If he comes in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master has given him a wife, and she has borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. But if the servant plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free, then his master shall bring him to the judges. He shall also bring him to the door or the doorpost of his home, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. Very simple little example. Back in the 60s, amongst a rebellious bunch of young people, men started putting earrings in their ear. And, of course, men that I would say are not very mindful of Scripture came to the determination that that was, the worst ungodliness that, you could ever imagine. These hippies, with this earring in their ear. And it's still, the sentiment is still today. But don't you know, like in itself, there's nothing wrong with having a man having an earring in his ear. In fact, God even commanded it. What about a nose ring? Oh, is that okay? According to your culture, if you're one of those people that believes your culture is the beginning and end of all truth, like, oh no, it's okay to have an earring in your ear, but not your nose. But don't you know that they put an earring in the nose for marriage? And God even said of Israel, I will put a ring in your nose, and you shall be my wife, in that sense, and what he said. And you look at these things and you compare, you really have to start reevaluating what is truth in your life. And, is it ungodly for a man to have an earring in his ear? Obviously not. Now maybe you can make the argument for any cause other than permanent servanthood. Well, maybe so, but boy, you're really stretching it there, aren't you? You're really stretching it. But this is the thing, and you're like, well, man, how now with this Hebrew servant? This was very much in the sense of a slave. We could fast forward, but, I should just put this up front. With God, there was only 3 ways to fall into slavery. That was poverty, debt, or crime. That's how you came into slavery in God's law, in God's community, in his nation that he made. You're like, well, how do I become a slave? There was no kidnapping and selling of slaves. Nor were you supposed to buy somebody that was kidnapped and sold as a slave. In fact, he made particular laws about that. If anybody kidnaps and sells people as slaves, that they need to be killed. There wasn't that. The reason why this happened is because there wasn't this currency that went around. There wasn't these jobs. You were out in the middle of a Bedouin lifestyle in a desert. You needed a people group. You needed somebody around you. You needed a community, right, to live. Maybe you were in severe poverty. Maybe you needed something, right, to stay alive, to support your family. Maybe you committed a crime, and now you have to pay for it, and that's going to be paid. Maybe you had a debt that you couldn't pay, and that's how you paid it. And you became like an indentured servant. Now, before you're thinking like this is horrible, God also had standards for which you were supposed to be able to treat your slaves and your servants, and how you were supposed to be able to deal with them. And so it wasn't like the idea that we've been left with in American slavery, where people were kidnapped and stolen from Africa and sold in a slave trade. It was very much, and it was something very necessary. The people who were slaves at that point really wanted to be a slave. Hagar did not want to go free. She said, don't send me away. I would like to stay. I want to live. And well, God said, well, I'll take care of you. I'll live. And so Abraham sent her off. You know, we are so myopic because of all of the wealth and the resources we have. We cannot imagine being in the position to where we say, listen, will you give me a place to stay and protect me and some food to eat, and I'll work for you. But that's a real blessing for people in this world. We don't realize just how like spoiled brat kind of thing we are. That's a real blessing. You're like, wait, okay, listen, this is the deal. I'll serve you for 6 years, and for 6 years, and you're going to give me, these are the guidelines we'll read in a bit. You know, the thing that God demanded of people in terms of wives and slaves and servants was, you know, shelter, food, and clothing. Where do you think Paul got it? Right in the New Testament, that if you have shelter, food, and clothing, you need to be content, is what he said. And, you know, the deal was, we're like, okay, listen, you'll give me food to eat and a place to stay and protection, you know, from bandits and warlords and kidnappings and other, you know, yes, please, sign me up. You know, I would like to do that. And, you know, and to make things even better, you know, and by the way, Deuteronomy is like the cliff notes for all of this stuff. Almost every passage through, you know, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, that there's correlating passages in Deuteronomy. You can go, and sometimes it sheds more light. I talked so long, I was like, man, I better not cover them, you know? So, but, you know, you can always go back and find the conditions of this. And so it was a very different time, a very different situation. You know, and what today here, the only difference is the money is put into your hand and the responsibility falls on you to find your own place to stay and buy your own food and buy your own clothing. But still, it's very realistic. There's tons of people living at the poverty level in this nation, and they're buying food and clothing and shelter and not much beyond that. Simple life. Even in the most wealthy nation, or maybe arguably the most wealthy nation in the world, you know, that's a reality, and that's a standard of living and a way to live, and it's not bad. I don't know, we have this in our ideas that there's this entitlement, but God never seemed to think that it's man's entitlement to be prosperous or to be rich or to live in luxury or to have great pleasures. In fact, he says it could ruin you. It could really mess you up, you know, and be careful about it. But that wasn't his concern. But there was this idea, this is like Eliezer and Abraham, that if he wanted to remain a slave, and so by the way, it wasn't horrible, you know, to do that. Eliezer said, no, I want to stay. I want to work for you. Just like y'all have jobs that you wouldn't want to leave, that provide you with your needs, that he could run it all through his ear before the elders and serve him. But although I do believe that he was available for dismissal at the year of Jubilee, even this servant, that in the 50th year, if it lasted that long, I mean, he'd have to work it out right. You know, hey, let's do this when I'm 18, and maybe when I'm, you know, however long that would be, you know, 68, you know, I'll be able to go free. But I don't think that was the relationship that was in place. I think they wanted to be there. And he says, and if a man sells his daughter, well, that sounds bad again. What's he talking about? It's also the dowry price. You know, if a man receives dowry for his daughter, you might like that translation better. If a man sells his daughter to be a female slave, you know, or a concubine, rather, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. If she does not please her master, who has betrothed her to himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he has dealt deceitfully with her. And if he has betrothed her to his son, he shall deal with her according to the customs of daughters. If he takes another wife, he shall not diminish her food, her clothing, and her marriage rights. And if he does not do these three for her, then she shall go out free without paying nothing. You see, God putting things in place there, even for a wife that was sold. And maybe you think that that's, below you, or whatever the thoughts are that come into that. But to many of them, that was a very respectable thing to do and way to live. I'll be a wife. I receive dowry. And you think, well, that sounds so cheap. Well, would you rather given away and not shown that there's a value for you? And actually, the dowry was just reserved alimony, because if, the man didn't follow through with everything that he said, that the redemption money was there already ahead of time, paid by the husband-to-be himself, and it was to be given back. And it really becomes very evident here, and I don't know that this principle ever changed with God, how much God intended for the man-woman relationship to be leadership and submission. You go and you read through his law, it's very hard to deal with, like exegetically. And I really, the further I go and the more I study Scripture, when people ask me about that, I say, I don't know if we want to know the extent to which God, and I think the thing that probably most sets it in stone for me, how serious God is about male leadership and a woman being submissive to her husband, that the fact that it's the illustration given for Christ in the church. Is there more obnoxiously strong illustration to look at and just say, well, I don't know how Christ deals with you, but he'll listen to my opinion, but he sees to his leadership. He'll listen to my cares and my sorrows and my woes and my objections, but you know what? He's got the authority, and we've been through it, and God, I don't like this, and I don't know about this, and I don't like what you're doing, and I'm tired of this, and I come up with all these objections, but nevertheless, his authority is over me. And that's tough. And it's a hard thing, even for a man of God, to get that about his own Lord. But you look in his law, and you see how much God has placed not only the authority, but also the responsibility. An interesting thing about all of these, if we look at the next one, he who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death. However, if he did not lie in wait, but God delivered him up into his hand, then I will appoint for you a place where he may flee, and if he accidentally killed somebody. But if a man acts with premeditation against his neighbor, what we call premeditated murder, to kill him by treachery, then you shall take him from my altar that he may die. And he who strikes his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. And he who kidnaps a man and sells him, there you go for slavery. He who kidnaps a man and sells him, or if he is found in his hand, shall surely be put to death. And he who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. Isn't it amazing that God understood how critical it was for children to be under the control of their parents? Like that was foundational for God. That was essential. And without that, there would be the erosion of a culture. There'd be the erosion of the principles and the morals, the ethics, the values of a culture. And he made it very severe, in the laws that he gave. And this stuff happened. And I think it's a big challenge to us when we ask the question, who is God? And what is God like? And what are the things that God does? You have to read all this, and you have to incorporate that. And I really come to the conclusion that God didn't create our lives, and he didn't create this world for us to have a good time. Although he's certainly incorporated a good time into it. I have a good time pretty often. But I realize that really wasn't his purpose, that there's something much bigger, there's something much more, there's a bigger issue. But the thing that stuck out to me more than anything reading this, and I think it's probably the first time that it ever did in reading through the law, is that every one of these things has a common denominator, and that is responsibility. Again, I think Adrian Rogers that said, you focus on your rights and you'll have a revolution. He said you focus on your responsibilities and you'll have a revival. That God is a God, and I think it's so obvious through the law that he wrote for his people, that God is a God that wants you to be responsible for yourself. Responsibility, accountability. And every one of these really is more particular in how we're responsible towards one another. That's the second commandment. In the 10 Commandments, the first 4, he covered our responsibility towards him. And, in the second, in the last 6, he covered our responsibility towards our parents and to our neighbors. But on all of these things, what they all have to do with a responsibility, and even in terms of the ladies in this nation, is God wanted responsibility to be taken from them. If it was not the dad, it better be the husband. If it's not the husband, well, she needs to be, and there needs to be something there, and there needs to be something provided and something attained to, and that's a shame. And you look at one of the reasons why our culture is falling apart is because we have some of the most irresponsible men. And I don't mean just financially, I mean spiritually, emotionally, physically. Just irresponsible men. They're foolish with their lives. They're foolish with the decisions. They're foolish with the relationships. They don't adhere to what they did. And irresponsibility can be seen in so many ways. If you're a man and you're off into pornography, that's irresponsible. You don't even have to go to the Word of God. You can go to secular studies that show it's more damaging to your brain than drugs. You can look at people's lifestyles and their own testimonies and what they do. You know that it's irresponsible. We got guys driving around in a $100,000 truck, and they're pulling up to an apartment that they pay, $1,500 for every month. And then they call me, Pastor Jeff, I don't know why I don't have a wife. Why would God entrust you with a woman to care for when you're spending all your money on a $100,000 truck? I think it was Paul Shepherd, I don't know if y'all know who Paul Shepherd is. Great preacher. And he's talking, and he's black preacher. So he's like, you're leaning down the street in your Mercedes, and you pull up to a shack. He's like, you got your priorities all messed up. You're irresponsible. And you're not thinking right. You're not doing right. But responsibility is something that God incorporated in there. And I titled the day, Thou Shalt Be Responsible. Responsible for what you have, for who you are, for how you interact with people. And he said that in verse 18, if men contend with each other, and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and he does not die, but is confined to his bed, if he rises again and walks about outside with his staff, then he who struck him shall be acquitted. He shall only pay for the loss of his time, and he shall provide for him to be thoroughly healed. In other words, it's easy to understand. You have to take responsibility for what you did. You smacked some dude and you hurt him, not in self-defense. That's not what he's talking about. And then you're responsible. He says, if a man beats his male or female servant with a rod so that he dies under his hand, he shall surely be punished. You're responsible. Even with that slave, how you treat them. It says, notwithstanding, if he remains alive a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his property. If men fight and hurt a woman with child so that she gives birth prematurely, yet no harm follows, he shall surely be punished according to the woman's husband, punished accordingly as the woman's husband imposes on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. But if any harm follows, then he shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, and stripe for stripe. And elsewhere it makes it very clear that if the child is killed, then that man shall die. So, does God consider an unborn child to be a person? Well, he gave the death penalty. And in our ridiculous, absurd hypocrisy, we have it today in our own law. That if a man murders a woman who is pregnant, he's not charged with single homicide, he's charged with double homicide, yet the abortion clinics are not charged with homicide. You see what kind of flakes we are. And how messed up we are. It says, if a man strikes the eye of his male servant or female servant, destroys it, he shall let him go free for the sake of his eye. And if he knocks out the tooth of his male or female servant, he shall let him go free for the sake of his tooth. If an ox if an ox gores a man or a woman to death, then the ox shall surely be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be acquitted. But if the ox tended to thrust with its horns in times past, and it has been made known to his owner, and he has not kept it confined so that it has killed a man or a woman, the ox shall not be stoned, and its owner also shall not be put to death. If there is imposed on him a sum of money, then he shall pay to redeem his life whatever is imposed on him, whether it has gored a son or gored a daughter. According to this judgment, it shall be done for him. If the ox gores a male or female servant, he shall give to their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. If a man opens a pit, or if a man digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls in it, the owner of the pit shall make it good. He shall give money to their owner, but the dead animal shall be his. All of these things, love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. But the problem is, because of the hardness of their hearts, because of the hardness of our hearts, that we are not faithful extrapolators. You know what I mean? To love your neighbor as yourself. Anybody, with the right mind and thinking they dug a hole, and what should we do? We better cover this up. I fall into that. We do that stuff. We're working on something and it's kind of shaky. I say, hey, we're bracing this thing before we leave. Windstorm, or some kid starts swinging on this thing and it falls down. You've got to be responsible for what you're doing. You think about with the mind of God. God is looking at all these things. What God is saying is like, you're responsible for carelessness. You goof around and you got money for lottery, you got money to go out and eat at Red Lobster, you got money for this and money for that, and you don't fix the steering on your car, and you crash into somebody, guess what God thinks? You're responsible. That's your modern day ox, right? You knew, right? You knew that thing was wobbly. You knew it was getting bad. You know that there's maintenance that needs to be done. You stop and you think about the things that we're responsible for and what God holds us to. And remember that without Christ, we're judged according to the law. The things that we should set in place, the things that, how careless we are with our finances, the thing that's just going to destroy this world, or not this world, but this economy of ours, is that so foolish with our finances, and rather than living within our means and not buying the things that we should buy, we want to have more debt and dig ourselves deeper and have it now, and we'll finance it, and it's foolishness. And then you find out 2 or 3 years down the road, there's some hiccup in your life, and nothing's working out perfect. It's terrifying. As a roofer, I think about people and their irresponsibility with their finances, that we all the time have people that we work with living in $600,000-$700,000 homes, and they don't have $10,000 on hand to cover a deductible. Man, maybe I'm meddling here. That doesn't sound wise. And don't you understand, if, just something small happens, like, it's not going to take much, if you own a $600,000 home, $10,000 is like, not to mention the vehicles that are parked in their driveway and the bills, and they figure everything out, the American way of living, and they make, they make $200,000 a year, and their bills every year are $190,000. Nose barely above water. That's responsible living. You've got to live within your means. You have to take care of the things that you have. You need to make sure that your negligence is not going to affect your neighbor. And that's, our negligence can affect our neighbor. Our negligence can affect our spouse. I think about that more than anything in terms of men. I said a little while ago, irresponsible men, the greatest irresponsibility of men in our culture is spiritually. That they are not who they need to be, doing what they should be doing in order to lead their home. And I'm speaking from experience. I don't think that I've done wonderfully the last 20-something years, 22 years, right, honey bun? Yeah, 22 years. But I see the mistakes that I've made, and I need to adjust. And I need to learn, and I need to improve, and I need to realize, and that, do you realize how much of the well-being of your home and your children and your grandchildren depend on what kind of spiritual life you live, the responsibility that you have as a leader? It's huge. And the trouble is that you can't pretend it in front of people. It's God that's watching. You don't need power from the church congregation. You need intervention and power from God. And you can't fool him. God's expecting you to be a leader. And God's going to act and intervene and on your behalf according to what you are and who you are. And you realize the responsibility. I tell you what, when I meet with premarital counseling today, I have a very different understanding than I did 15 or 20 years ago. I was naive. I did not take into account the responsibility I was taking on. I mean, I did it. I even knew a lot of scripture at the time. I did not realize, I did not think, hey, like Aaron, and her up on the hill with Moses, and, that you're standing there as a leadership figure, and your uprightness before God is critical for the well-being of your family. And to realize you've got to be responsible. And you've got to take responsibility towards your family, towards your neighbor. And all these things hinge on that. And if one man's ox hurts another so that it dies, then he shall sell it to live, sell the live ox and divide the money from it, and the dead ox they shall also divide. Or if it was known that the ox tended to thrust in time past, the owner has not kept it confined, he shall surely pay ox for ox, and the dead animal shall be his own. Chapter 22, if a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. That's why God did that. Otherwise, there's no risk. I'm going to go steal a sheep. What's the worst that's going to happen? I'm going to have to pay the price of a sheep? No. God wasn't after, in his law that he wrote, he made this very obvious. He wasn't just after settling scores. He was out to prevent unrighteousness. You go and you read about the capital punishments, and over it says, and you shall stone him before the congregation, that the others may see and fear. One thing's for sure, in our culture, in our society, we need to have particular expectations. Sadly, one thing that's been abused so much, to cloud the expectations is mental health. You go murder somebody, you might get the death penalty. You go murder somebody and convince them that you were crazy when you did it, you might get 3 years in a halfway house. That's not a hyperbole. That stuff happens. You kidnap children in the slave trade market, well, you might go to prison. If you get caught and you rat out other people, well, you might go free. There was none of that with God either. And we're coming into, you wonder why our society is falling apart. We've obscured the expectations for crime and penalties. And we don't know, well, we can get away with a lot now. But this, well, what did it mean? Well, what's the risk if you steal a sheep? Well, it's not just that you'd have to pay the price of that one sheep. That's not very risky. I used to be a thief, I know. A big deal. I'll go in here and try to steal this drill. The worst thing they're going to do is make me pay for it. What if I have to pay for 5 drills? Ooh. Now there's some risk, right? That's one thing about the law of God, that he always put the stress on the criminal. He always put the stress on the sinner and the offender. And he said, no, we're not going to, what are we doing today with our laws and our ordinances? That, in some states now, if somebody breaks into your home in the middle of the night, you're supposed to flee out the back. What? Yeah, the stress is on you, and it's off the criminal. If they come to loot the store, well, nope, you can't fight them. You have to let them loot. The stress is on you. Boy, you better hope you got good insurance and you can pay that deductible to pay all that merchandise, and better hope you can put it back together, especially if you're a mom and pop, and the stress is on you and not on the criminal. God didn't work that way. You wonder, well, what's wrong with our, are they wrong? Because we have people today, well, isn't that right? I don't want to shoot a criminal breaking into my house at night. Well, go back and realign your thinking with what God wrote. And you need to go back and you need to understand, well, how did God see it? And how did God decide that it should be done? But he shall pay 5, right? Or so 4 sheep, or sheep for sheep. In verse 2, and if a thief is found breaking in, if he is struck so that he dies, there shall be no guilt for his bloodshed. There you go, right? Somebody breaks into your home at night. I think God expects for you to protect your family, protect yourself. He said, if the sun has risen on him, there shall not be guilt for his bloodshed. He should make full restitution. In other words, somebody breaks into your home at night and you encounter them in your home, you kill them. If the dude got away with it, you see him walking around the village tomorrow, and you're still alive and he's in your home, you don't know if you're going to die. Is he going to kill me? Is he going to just steal? Is he going to kill me and rape my wife and daughters? What's he going to do? Thieves don't disclose up front. I want you to know that we're only going to steal stuff. Now, we watch the news, and sometimes it's just, breaking and entering with theft. Sometimes it's breaking and entering with rape, and sometimes it's breaking and entering with rape, theft, and murder. And you're like, well, we don't know. Thieves aren't kind enough. Criminals aren't kind enough to disclose this thing to them. God says you encounter them at night, you kill them, you're fine. If you catch them walking around the next day, right? Well, then there's no need to kill them. Your life's no longer at risk. You slept through it. Or whatever happened, but if the sun shall rise on him, well then he should make full restitution. If he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. Well, there we go. There's another way, right? How does slavery come about? Well, through poverty, debt, or crime. One of those things. I would to the Lord that we had a prison system today that would put prisoners in there and give them a job and make all of their earnings go to their victims. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't that be righteous? That was God's way of doing those things. And he said, if the theft is certainly found alive in if the theft is certainly found alive in his hand, whether it is an ox or a donkey or a sheep, he shall restore. And again, here it is, double, not just what he stole. If a man causes a field or a vineyard to be grazed and lets loose his animal and it feeds in another man's field, he shall make full restitution from the best of his own field and from the best of his own vineyard. If fire breaks out and catches in thorns, and so that stacked grain, standing grain, or the field is consumed, he who kindled the fire shall surely make restitution. If a man delivers to his neighbor money or articles to keep, and it is stolen out of the man's house, if the thief is found, he shall pay double. If the thief is not found, then the master of the house shall be brought to the judges to see whether he has put his hand into his neighbor's goods. For any kind of trespass, whether it concerns an ox, a donkey, a sheep, clothing, or any kind of lost thing which another claims to be his, the cause of both parties shall come before the judges, and whomever the judges condemn shall pay double to his neighbor. If a man delivers to his neighbor a donkey, an ox, a sheep, or any animal to keep, and it dies, is hurt, or driven away, no one seeing it, then an oath of the Lord shall be between them both, that he has not put his hand into his neighbor's goods, and the owner of it shall accept that, and he shall not make it good. But if in fact it is stolen from him, he shall make restitution to the owner of it. If it is torn to pieces by a beast, then he shall bring it as evidence, and he shall not make good what was torn. And if a man borrows anything from his neighbor, if it's my case, you have to remind me. Right? I tell you, I've gone a long time like, where's my siding nailer? I don't know where my siding nailer is. And another 6 months will go by and I'll run into somebody that, oh, I still got your siding nailer. Whack that dude over the head. It's like, I've been trying to figure out, of course, my own fault, I can't remember, and I didn't write it down, but, it'd be nice if you didn't wait so long to remind me, hey, you got my property. But if you're like me, you'll have to remind me. But if a man borrows anything from his neighbor and he becomes injured or dies, the owner of it not being with it, he shall surely make it good. If its owner was with it, he shall not make it good. It was hired. It came for its hire. It says, if a man entices a virgin who is not betrothed and lies with her, he shall surely pay the bride price for her to be his wife. Boy, now wasn't that something? Imagine if that was y'all, young men, you'd have to think twice. What does this mean? It means that you have to take responsibility for her. It means that, boy, your goofing off days are over. That you have a wife and you have to go to work and you have to see to those responsibilities and you have to take care for her. And, and if you want to play, you better pay is what God says. And so he wanted him to take responsibility for her. And he said that if her father utterly refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money according to the bride price of virgins. You shall not permit a sorceress to live. Boy, that was plain, right? He didn't have to. Anybody giving in divination and witchcraft, and we just don't realize. I know we're in a little bit of our own little, cloud here. And I don't know how familiar y'all are with Christendom, so-called, in the United States, and how many people would say, oh, yeah, I'm a Christian, I go to church, and they totally do astrology, and they have tarot cards, and they think, yeah, that needs to be incorporated. And Facebook alone, just like, people are talking about, what are they always wanting to do? They're wanting some kind of stuff to clean their homes. Y'all know what it is? Sounds like sage, and that they want to go through these Wiccan rituals and stuff to get the evil spirits so away from. I was like, man, do they not realize? Do they not realize? For a lack of knowledge, do they not know that God despises anything like that? Anything like that? Anything that's led by the occult and anything that's led by demons, which that very thing is. He made it very simple. A sorceress is not to live. And whoever lies with an animal shall surely be put to death. It's rumored that was the first execution in the United States among the colonies, was bestiality. He who sacrifices to any god except the Lord only, he shall be utterly destroyed. You shall neither mistreat a stranger nor oppress him. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Now, is that a God that sounds like he is ruthless? The immigrant, the stranger that is among you, he says you better not mistreat him. All over, and it's semantics are so hard. Even anybody that's married knows you're doing your very best to communicate what you mean, and you're trying to understand each other. And you're like, let's just give each other the benefit of the doubt. We're trying to use words to communicate meaning, and it's even more difficult when you use words from another language translated in your language. But whatever you do, you need to read through the Scripture and you need to look for what God means. Because even in the translation, it's difficult. But I see when he makes things like this, that you should not mistreat the stranger among you, that helps me understand the meaning of God. He says, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. He said, you shall not afflict any widow or fatherless child. If you afflict them in any way and they cry at all to me, I will surely hear their cry, and my wrath will become hot, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall be widows, and your children fatherless. If you lend money to any of my people who are poor among you, you shall not be like a moneylender to him. You shall not charge him interest. Wasn't that interesting? How different our culture, and I know that not that I believe capitalism is a bad thing. It's produced the greatest society to live in the history of the world. But even within capitalism, let's be careful not to think that it's godliness. Godliness was no mortgages, no high interest loans. Don't you know what the devil's done to this country through that? Hey, you can have it now. You just pay. Isn't that interesting? Down to that little detail, God says, I don't like interest loans. Nope, don't do that. I don't want that to be there. And I guess he knew what it would do to people and how they would live. He says, you should not charge them any interest. He says, if you ever take your neighbor's garment as a pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down. For that is his only covering. It is his garment for the skin. What will he sleep in? And it will be that when he cries to me, I will hear. For I am gracious. You shall not revile God, nor curse a ruler of your people. That's probably a principle of God that all of us conservatives should take to heart. As much as you may not like some of our rulers, there's a big difference between disparaging and expressing disapproval. Right? I'm not a fan of what did they start saying? I can't even remember the phrase. Yeah, let's go, Brandon. I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of that. I don't like what's behind it. I don't like the mentality of it. It's not godliness. It's not good. For us to do that. There's a tasteful and a respectful way to communicate that you do not like the dealings of a particular political group or a particular person. But God said, in a generality, don't badmouth them. He said, you shall not delay to offer the first of your ripe produce and your juices, your vintage, from the grapes. He says, your firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. And what he meant is the offering price, and they should be dedicated unto the Lord. He said, likewise you shall do with all of your oxen and your sheep, and it shall be with its mother 7 days. On the 8th day you shall give it to me. And verse 31, and you shall be holy men to me. You shall not eat meat from any torn beast in the field, or you shall not throw it to the dogs. You shall be responsible. You wonder, well, what is holiness? What is godliness? And when I think about it in this sense, in this context, godliness is responsibility. Responsibility is love. You find the most irresponsible people you can think of in your life, and you'll find out that they need no blessing, that they're loving no one, right? They are really a train wreck, aren't they? Going about this life, draining and mooching and, plaguing and, that the person that ignores the responsibility in their life and no blessing, and they're no lover. But the person who will take on responsibility, and I can't think of a more obnoxious example than a God who created a man that he knew would fall from grace. And he already before the foundations of the earth took the responsibility upon himself. Didn't he? I think about that and how he went faithfully to the cross, and he took that responsibility on himself to die as a propitiation atonement for our sins. But you think about what responsibilities you have. We have responsibilities towards God. You're bought with a price. You're not your own. We have responsibilities towards our spouse. That husbands would love their wives as Christ loved the church, and that wives would submit themselves unto their husbands. You have responsibilities towards your parents to honor them. You may not agree with them, but you had better respect them and honor them, and for the time that you're dependent on them. Even beyond that is what it says. We have responsibilities towards our neighbors out there. Even simple things, texting and driving. I imagine if God wrote the law today and he says if anybody was texting and he crashed into his neighbor and killed him, he's going to pay. He'll probably have to die. That would probably be what God would do. And you stop and you think about that. What makes a wonderful culture and people, responsible people? That's the thing that God desires for us. And he said, you shall be holy men unto me, after he gave all those descriptions of responsibility. Let's pray. Father, Lord, bless us to know who you are, your personality, and bless us to be close enough and knowledgeable enough about you that we don't have to go looking for a rule, but we know what our Father says and feels and thinks. as much as our dads on this own, in this life, as we knew them, we knew exactly any moment how they would think or feel or respond to something. So may we be that way with you, God, and to know your character, to know you, to know who you are. And may we be mindful, God, of the time given unto us, Lord, the responsibilities that have been entrusted unto us, that we would not be foolish with them, God, but that we would follow your example and fulfill those obligations, fulfill those responsibilities, as you said, not to look out for our own well-being, but God, for that of our neighbor, that for our brother and sister. Lord, cause us to be more like you, I pray, in Christ's name. Amen.